Hi guys, Freddy here. Welcome back to another Retro Adventures. And at the end of another week, and the end of another poll, we've got a very clear winner with a Doomsday like any other for the old FASA Star Trek role-playing game. Now, we'll have a look at that on the desktop in a wee second. But as usual, I'll be back at the end of the video with some other poll-related stuff and some channel-related stuff. You could be a Scottish laird. Under an ancient Scottish law where anyone who owns land in Scotland can use the title of laird before their name, a law which actually doesn't exist. But what the hell, I'm willing to assign you a piece of my garden in the lowlands of Scotland and offer you a printable certificate to use the title of laird. Just join our Patreon at the laird level, choose a section of my garden, and then you can be a laird of Scotland. See my Patreon below, where you can get access to my videos a week early, help the channel out, be credited at the end of videos, and stake a claim to a tiny little piece of Scotland. Offer has no standing under law. Offer does not give you any real rights to part of my garden. Offer does not really make you a landowner. Offer is no different to all other Scottish title offers out there. So, this is a Doomsday like any other. Came out from FASA in 1986 for the Star Trek role-playing game. It's an adventure set during the movie period, and you can see from the uniforms. But the picture otherwise is misleading, which is one of the points I'd like to get to before I move on from the front cover. Because we can see this is a Miranda class, the same class as the Reliant in Star Trek II. You can see from the visual on the screen as well. Now, even though this is obviously painted for the module, because there is a Doomsday machine on the display screen in front, and the picture covers around to the back and has the Doomsday machine on there, again with the Miranda class, the ship in the adventure is a Chandley class, which I don't see why they didn't include. They probably didn't have any reference for the artist, maybe, but the Chandley class is a much larger starship, so it gives the players options they wouldn't have had with a Miranda class. Because the Chandley class is a marine carrier, so they have access to soldiers they can assign to elements of the adventure, which gives them options they wouldn't have had. The other element I'd like to mention before we go any further than the front cover is that I thought this adventure was going to be nice and meaty, 64 pages. But the adventure itself actually ends on page 20. The rest is detail about the planet, various starships, cast of characters, and background information, handouts and the like. We'll go through those as we go through the adventure, but the bulk of the adventure is finished by page 20. So a third of the book is the adventure, and there's just extra information for the rest of it, which I felt pretty disappointed at. Although, much like the adventure I covered last time for Cyberpunk 2020, where there's elements that you have to build into the adventure, the extra stuff in this does allow you a much easier job of that. So, while the adventure glosses over certain situations and puts a lot of work onto the Games Master to build those up for the players, it does provide a lot of ammunition later on. But we'll see that as we go through. Let's have a look at the back cover. It was a dull patrol, and the officers and crew of the frigate USS Fife were tired of the routine, tired of watching an empty frontier. Then a call for help put the Fife face to face with one of the most implacable foe ever faced by Starfleet. One of the robot-brained Doomsday machines, like the one destroyed years before by the USS Enterprise. As if that weren't enough, the Fife had to contend with panicky civilians, selfish VIPs, interfering Romulans, and a colourful rogue whose surprising cargo might hold the only hope of stopping the planet-crushing juggernaut. It'd be a day they would all remember, but it certainly wouldn't be a Doomsday like any other. Well, why call it a Doomsday like any other if it's not going to be that? Just found it an odd thing to put in there. But it's a nice title, the cover's lovely. We dig inside, we've got a table of contents, allowing you to find everything. And then we're into the introduction. Now, we talk about what it is, an adventure for Star Trek, talks about the USS Fife, but then we've got a plot synopsis. Now, if you're running this adventure, I advise skipping over the plot synopsis. It really doesn't do the adventure justice at all. It cuts large sections out, which are perhaps the most interesting parts of the adventure. The bulk of the adventure itself does a far better job of telling the story. The synopsis really is quite poor. So we've got the contents of the book detailing what was the adventure, cast of characters, Games Master's notes, players' handouts in it. And then we're into the adventure itself. So we've got the introductory story. Basically, they're on a patrol and they pick up a distress call from a Federation free trader, the Pride of Rigel. And they come to its rescue, where it is being chased by a Doomsday machine. Now, the free trader can outrun it, as can the Federation ship, so slipping away from the Doomsday machine isn't too much of a problem. That's just introducing the Doomsday machine into the adventure. What is also introduced in this is that the Doomsday machine is heading for an inhabited planet. So that's the next target. Players head for the planet, Ecter. They have 72 hours to basically convince the government of the planet, which is not on great relationship with the Federation. It actually gets on with the Romulan Star Empire more. But there's a Romulan cargo vessel in orbit. So, do they speak to the Romulans and try and get them to use influence? Do they try and put their own influence onto the government? How do they do it? Basically, as they research how to deal with the Doomsday machine, they come up with the facts from the episode of the original series of Star Trek, that detonating the warp engines of a starship will destroy it. But there are only 4 starships available. The Pride of Rigel, the Romulan cargo vessel, the player's starship, the Fife, and a passenger vessel owned by Ecter. Well, they're not going to want to put their only starship to destruction, on the words of the Federation. So there's lots of things about convincing the government, the diplomatic approach. They can go to the company itself and try and wrangle it off instead of getting the government. There's violence because they've got 250 Marines. As I said earlier, it's got options, which having a Marine-carrying starship gives them. There's the Romulan option. They can try and talk the Romulans into helping them. But the Romulans will go back to their own government, because although they're a cargo vessel, they do work for the Romulans and they are part of the military. Then we're on to the section aboard the floating crap game, because it assumes that you're going to be using the passenger liner to use what they call the Kirk defense of detonating the warp engines. It talks through the opportunities, getting the people off this passenger liner because it's filled with people, getting control of the vessel, restoring order as people panic because people are trying to get on a passenger vessel to get off the planet, because while some people could escape from the planet, there are far too few starships around to evacuate it. Then we've got the situation where the Romulans might take control of it and try for themselves, because they've got access to it. However, whatever happens, the Kirk defense fails to destroy the Doomsday machine. So whether it's the Romulans that do it, whether it's the players that do it, whatever happens, they make an attempt to destroy the Doomsday machine, and it fails. Now, this is one of the sections where there's a lot of work for the Games Master to build up, because it barely mentions that. After everyone has beamed over the Royale, the Fife withdraws to a safe distance to watch the liner as drawn into the mouth of the machine. First, there is a blinding burst of light. After the burst dies out, however, the glow inside the machine's maw is undimmed. The behemoth continues to lumber on towards its goal. The experts have been proven correct. Admiral though it is, the Kirk defense is not infallible. Ecter's only hope is gone. And that's the description. There's not any action which goes on as you try and get the starship close or whatever. It's just a paragraph which explains. So the Game Pass has a lot of work to do there. There's also other sections where it's talking about speaking to the politicians, getting access to the government. Consider the mood set in the negotiations with the Council in the Star Trek episode, The Mark of Gideon. It's getting you to go away and watch episodes to get the tone of it. Anyway, so the adventure continues, Second Chance. The freighter that the players rescued at the beginning of the adventure reveals some information. They found the Doomsday machine disabled and floating in space, with a beacon floating round it. They tracked the beacon on board their ship, and the Doomsday machine activated. Well, what they discover as it carries on is that the beacon is a key for the Doomsday machines to shut it down for maintenance. So if the players can get access to it, they will be able to shut down the Doomsday machine and salvage it or destroy it. But the free trader wants to sell it, and he puts it up to auction between the Federation and the Romulans. However, the situation changes because the Romulans have contacted their own people. So while the Federation are some weeks away from arriving, the Romulan fleet arrives. But they are willing to team up with the Federation to gain access to this beacon. You do science on the beacon, discover how it works, and then you intercept the Doomsday machine, remembering that it's getting closer and closer to the planet. You use the beacon, which shuts down the Doomsday machine, and which allows you to board it because a hatch opens up in its hull. The hulls of the Doomsday machines are made out of neutronium, which is indestructible in Star Trek. But this hatch opens and allows the players to go on board. There's access through the airlock, and then you get access to a control room. There's computers, and it talks through all that. It goes through episodes of Star Trek, the M5, the Landru computer, how the Doomsday machine's computer works in Star Trek. But the situation changes. Once they manage to shut down the Doomsday machine, the Romulans turn around and go, "Thank you very much, we'll have it now. We can destroy your starship, we've got more people, we'll take it, thank you very much. This will bolster our empire a lot." But then they get double-crossed, because the free traders have prepared for this and want to seize the vessel and auction it off. So they ambush the Romulans and the Federation, locking you away. And then we come to the outcomes. So we've got combat on the machine, what happens, whether the Romulans' ploy works, whether the machine can be taken by the players, because it's possible, because they've been part of the boarding party, they can seize control of the machine to defend the Fife by taking on the Romulan ships with the Doomsday machine. What happens if the computer gets reactivated and the planet killer goes rogue again? And then we've got the last act, where it talks about what happens to the Doomsday machine. Because obviously, having access to that technology is incredible, and the adventure wants it destroyed. It will talk through all the options, but it gives you a final option that, once it's handed over to the Federation, that an engineer will make a mistake and it will be destroyed, to remove it from the playing field. And then we've got the Captain's Log supplemental at the end, which is the outro. Captain's Log. Now, going through the rest of the book, we've got details about Ecter, the planet which is threatened, its background, their society and culture. We've got details about the Chandley class, which the Fife is. As I said, I really like the Chandley class. I like it. These big areas at the side, these wings, are filled with training areas and barracks for Marines. Got the Cosmos Royale liner, which is a nice looking ship, but I would question the fact that it seems to have the same nacelles as Federation vessels when the planet that owns it doesn't like the Federation particularly. They're more close to the Romulans, so why doesn't it have Romulan type engines? Especially when the Dwarf Star class freighter, which is the one used by the trader, who is kind of aligned by the Federation that they rescue, has different nacelles. Just swap the images round, I would say. We've got various Romulan ships, because of course the task force turns up, so they have several vessels. Then we've got details on the Doomsday machine itself. So we've got shipboard conditions, descriptions of the different rooms on board it. We've got a layout of the area that the players can get access to once they board it. We've got the cast of the characters, the captain of the Fife, Jason Q. Culver, captain, Lydia C. Marston, the commander. We've got Sengwu Chiang, who looks to be a Vulcan, but wears glasses. Helmut Albrecht. I'll flip through because we've got loads of different characters here. We've got Tellarite, lesser officers. We've got the various Romulan officers which take part in it. The crew of the Pride of Rigel, all their stats. The various important Ecterians, including the head of state, various bureaucrats. We've got Games Master's notes on how you should flow through the different encounters, how they go into one another towards the end of the adventure, but really this only takes you up as far as the destruction of the Cosmos Royale, so the end of the first attempt to destroy the Doomsday Machine. But it talks about pacing in the adventure, because obviously you've got 72 hours, so time is passing, with the Doomsday Machine coming ever closer to destroying a planet and killing millions. Special game considerations, so the deadline, boarding party size and composition, games mastering the NPCs, games mastering the Romulans, so giving you an idea what their attitudes are like and how they behave, the different Marines. We've got various random encounters, so when they board the Cosmos Royale, when people are panicking, they maybe set up barricades because they don't want to be taken off. We've got the captain of the ship the captain of the ship cannot bear to see his precious liner destroyed and goes off the deep end. And then we've got Doomsday Machine encounters, so transporter failure, faulty circuitry, communications breakdowns, machine attacks. And then we've got background information about the Doomsday Machine to fill in the Games Master on what we know about it, mainly from the episode, The Doomsday Machine, but with its origins, how the beacon pod works, the machine behaviour. We've got a player handout giving much of the same, but not telling too much, because obviously the Games Master knows the truth of it. Talk about the Kirk defence, Ecter, just lots of background information for the players, what neutronium is, the Outback for the section of space between the Federation and Romulans, the Treaty of Ecter. We've got intelligence summary Romulan activity sectors, Gorn Alliance activity, and the Bureau of Foreign Relations guidelines for Ecter. Rules laid out for the players on how they should be handling all the different governments. As I said, it's a lot of manual work for the Games Master to put these together, but thinking through how the different encounters will work ahead of time does make this a very interesting adventure. I like the twists and turns. I do like the fact that you have to get into politics at the start. You're doing diplomacy, which is a very Star Trek type thing, even though the adventure does come down to combat at the end, as the Romulans turn on you and then the free traders turn on them and you. It's a very interesting adventure and I do like it a lot, but there is quite a bit of heavy lifting for the Games Master to do in preparation to run it. So that was a Doomsday like any other, and that won the poll this week with some 32% of the vote. Almost a third of all votes were cast for it. Far ahead of the number 2 placed Death on the Reich for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay on 24%, which itself was ahead of Resection of Time for Call of Cthulhu on 18%, Quest for the Unknown for Hackmaster on 15%, and Tales from the Ether for Space 1889 on only 11%. Now, as usual, they're all cleared out of the poll, and we're back to a retro RPG. And I've tended to go for the shelf of contributions I've got. Games I've been given. 4 of the ones in this poll are off that shelf, so things I haven't really looked at. And in fact, one of them, I turn out I've got 2 copies of it, even though I've never really looked through it. I must have been given it by 2 different people. But anyway, in the poll this week, we've got Road Warriors for Deadlands Hell on Earth. So, the Mad Max sourcebook for that post-apocalyptic game. We've got The Point of No Return for Babylon 5, covering the 3rd season, it is, I think, of the television series. Now we've got Byzantium Secundus for Fading Suns, a sourcebook for that rather interesting science fiction role-playing game. I've covered a few of the books for it, and I've covered different versions of the rules. But this looks to be pretty interesting. But again, it's something I'm not that familiar with. We've got And a 10-Foot Pole from Iron Crown Enterprises, mainly for Role Master, but it covers a lot of role-playing games. Basically, it's an equipment book for the medieval period. So, everything you can get, and all the different uses of those things. And finally, we've got Ultratech for GURPS, one of the most amazing source books, taking it into extremely high technology levels. So, that's the polls out of the way. On channel-rated stuff, well, the Cyberpunk Red Easy Mode game didn't come off as we couldn't get enough players. We've rescheduled it for a week's time, which will now be a week in the past when this video comes out. We shall see if we get any more players for that. I did have a couple of people indicating that they were interested but couldn't make it that first week. But I've taken that week to write an intro for it, because the pre-published adventure in easy mode drops you straight into the action, having the characters coming back from a mission. So I've written that mission to get more than the very few encounters which are written into the adventure as published. I've extended it out a bit. But we shall see if that game comes off and we get enough players. But if we do, I've got some extra for them. Other channel-related stuff, there's not much else. So I think I've whittled on for quite long enough as usual. So thank you very, very much for watching. But as always, you look after yourselves. And I'll catch you later. Bye now.